The air in the conference room was stale recycled, just the two of us, me sitting across from him. The glass table, a cold hard barrier, he was leaning back in his chair, a picture of casual power. The annual review had been a formality. Until that point, he skimmed the document, mumbled about metrics being acceptable. Then he looked at me, not with malice, but with a kind of bored indifference. That was the worst part. It wasn't even a heated insult. It was a casual offhand remark, like he was commenting on the weather. Then I looked at the company structure. Where did the real power lie? Who made the decisions? It wasn't just the org chart. It was about influence. I identified key players, the senior VP, of course, the head of finance, who valued efficiency. Above all, a few senior directors in other departments, who had the VP's ear. These were the people I needed on my side, not as co-conspirators, but as people who would over time see my value independently of my boss. The first step was the mental shift. I had to stop thinking like an employee waiting for a review and start thinking like a CEO protecting an investment. I went home that night and I didn't complain. I got out a notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote "me incorporated." It sounded silly, but it was necessary. I needed the framing. I started analyzing the market. What was the business environment? This company was my client, a demanding, sometimes irrational client. But a client nonetheless. My boss wasn't my boss anymore. He was a difficult stakeholder, a major point of contact, whose satisfaction was important, but not the sole measure of my success. The real measure was the value I delivered to the client organization as a whole. Then I had to define my product. What was my unique value proposition? What could me Inc. do that no other vendor on the team could provide? I looked around. We had great analysts, sure, but I realized my strength wasn't just in producing data. It was in translating it. I could see the story the numbers were telling and communicate it in a way that drove action. That was my product. My company's specialty was turning complex data into clear strategic insight. That was the problem I solved better than anyone else. That was my market niche. With the mindset in place, I moved to business development. A good CEO is always looking to increase the company's value. For me Inc. that meant investing heavily in research and development. I stopped seeing professional development as an HR requirement and started seeing it as product improvement. I identified a gap in my knowledge: advanced data visualization. So I allocated a portion of my revenue, me salarido pay, for an intensive online course. I dedicated time each week, treating it like a critical RD project. I wasn't just learning a new skill, I was upgrading my company's core offering. Marketing and sales became my new obsession. I used to just do the work and hope someone noticed. Now every accomplishment was a marketing opportunity. I didn't boast. I reported after a successful project. I would send a concise email to my boss and key stakeholders, not a long essay, just a few bullet points. Project X completed. Key outcome: identified a 15 efficiency saving in the supply chain. Next step: implementing the recommended changes. It was a press release for me Inc. I was strategically communicating my value to secure new contracts, and it worked. I started getting pulled into more high-profile cross-departmental projects. My client was giving me Inc. more business because the marketing was effective. Financial management was the most revealing part. I started tracking my impact on the client's bottom line with the precision of a CFO when I streamlined a reporting process that saved the team 10 hours a week. I calculated the monetary value of that time when my analysis led to a new vendor contract that saved the company $50,000 a year that went into my ledger. I built a quiet private business case. This wasn't for a performance review, this was for my own board meeting. I needed to know with absolute certainty what a price increase, a raise, or promotion would be justified based on the tangible value me Inc. was delivering. The numbers didn't lie. My profitability to the client was rising quarter after quarter. Phase 2 was the silent grind. I became a ghost in the machine, a force of pure unassailable competence. I volunteered for the most complex high-visibility projects, ones everyone else avoided, because they were messy and difficult, the kind of projects that if they succeeded would be noticed by the entire division. I didn't do it for a pat on the back, I did it for the paper trail. No business operates in a vacuum. I began to focus on strategic alliances and mergers. I looked for opportunities to collaborate with other departments, not just as a helpful colleague, but as a company seeking a beneficial partnership. I reached out to the marketing team. My data translation skills could help them understand customer analytics better in return, their project gained more depth, and my visibility within the organization increased dramatically. It was a classic win-win merger. My influence grew without me having to fight for territory. I also started thinking about talent acquisition. A strong CEO builds a great team. I began mentoring a couple of the newer analysts. I wasn't just being nice, I was investing in the human capital of Me Inc. By elevating their skills, I was increasing the overall capacity and value of my company. A team that produces exceptional work reflects well on its leader. I was building a reputation, not just as a high performer, but as a force multiplier. Most importantly, I started managing my board of directors. In this analogy, the senior leadership above my boss were my key investors and advisors. I made a point of building relationships with them. I'd ask for their perspective on industry trends. In casual conversations, by the coffee machine, I'd volunteer to present my findings in their meetings. I was showing the board that Me Inc. was a strategic asset and investment, worth protecting and growing. I was ensuring they knew the value of my company, independent of the sometimes filtered view they got from my direct stakeholder, my boss. For a year I operated this way. The emotional sting was gone. His occasional comments about replaceability just bounced off. They were irrelevant. He was commenting on the performance of a generic employee. I was no longer that. I was a business entity. Our interactions became transactional. I delivered value. He was the recipient. It was clean, it was professional. Then the opportunity presented itself, the hostile takeover. The market shifted. A major client was threatening to leave, and the handling of the situation was a mess. My boss's position, his entire approach, became a vulnerable asset. He was reactive, emotional. The board was getting nervous. I saw the opening. It was time for Me Inc. to make a bid. I requested an urgent meeting with the senior leadership, my board. I didn't go in to complain about my boss. That would have been amateurish. I went in with a business proposal. I presented a clear, data-driven analysis of the client situation. I outlined a new strategy, not as a suggestion from a subordinate, but as a proposal from a capable partner. I showed them the risks of the current path and the tangible benefits of my proposed solution. I demonstrated how my unique value proposition, turning complex problems into clear action plans, was exactly what was needed. I was presenting my business case for why Me Inc. was the logical choice to take over management of the situation, and by extension the department. The meeting was quiet. They asked hard questions. I had the numbers, the projections, the risk assessments. I spoke their language, the language of business. I wasn't asking for a promotion. I was proposing a merger, a strategic acquisition, where my company would assume control of a troubled asset and restore its value. I started documenting everything, not in a paranoid way, but with the meticulousness of a lawyer building a case. Every project initiation, every milestone hit ahead of schedule, every kudos from a client. Every time I identified a cost-saving measure, I saved emails where my boss gave me vague, poor direction. I made notes of meetings where I presented a solution that he initially dismissed, only for it to become company policy. Weeks later, after a problem arose, I created a private folder. The call came on a Friday afternoon. The head of the division offered me the job. My boss was being moved to a special projects role. There was no gloating, there was no personal victory dance. When I hung up the phone, I felt nothing like I thought I would. It wasn't euphoria, it was quiet satisfaction, the closure of a successful deal. The acquisition was complete. My promotion wasn't a reward for loyalty or a result of office politics. It was a logical business decision. The board had looked at two entities. One was a liability, a depreciating asset. The other was Me Inc., a growing, profitable strategic partner. The choice was simple. They invested in the stronger asset. I sat in the new chair. It doesn't squeak. The glass walls now feel less like a fishbowl and more like the windows of a corner office. I don't feel like I won. I feel like my company secured a major long-term contract, and my first order of business is to evaluate the portfolio, see which assets are underperforming, and make the necessary strategic adjustments. The work continues. The business is open. Day 0, the performance review. The room was so sterile, so quiet you could hear the hum of the laptop projector. My boss, David, leaned back in his chair, not even looking at me, just staring at the spreadsheet on the screen. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. He said, "You know, Sarah, you're a solid contributor, a reliable pair of hands. But you lack the killer instinct. "You don't have the fire for real leadership." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. And in that moment, something just snapped. It wasn't anger, not really, it was colder than that. It was a crystal clear realization. This man, this obstacle, was mistaking my patience for weakness. He saw my strategic silence as a lack of ambition. And he was so wrong. That insult, that patronizing assessment, it wasn't a setback, it was my burning platform. It was the declaration of war I hadn't even known I needed. I walked out of that room, my face a perfect mask of calm. But inside, the plan was already forming, hard and sharp. I went straight back to my desk, opened a blank document, and I typed a single sentence at the top in bold: "Objective: assume David's role within 90 days. I didn't tell a soul. This wasn't a goal to be shared. It was a promise to be executed. That night, I didn't sleep. I built what I called my ruthless priority list. Just 3 things, not a to-do list. A strategic map first. Visibility: I had to be seen not as a worker, but as a leader. Second, value: I had to deliver tangible, high-impact results that directly affected the division's key metrics. And third, vulnerability: I had to identify the precise cracks in David's foundation and apply just the right amount of pressure. The very next morning the blitz began. I became a different person, not louder, but unavoidable. There was a project kickoff for the new client integration, a messy, high-stakes thing that David had been conspicuously avoiding. Because the client was known to be difficult, he sent a junior manager. I walked into that meeting uninvited. I just said David asked me to sit in to ensure we're aligning with the Q4 strategic goals, a complete lie, but delivered with such conviction that nobody questioned it. I listened for 10 minutes, then I asked one question that completely reframed the entire problem. You could see the room shift. The junior manager looked relieved, the client looked engaged. For the first time, I volunteered to own the communication stream. Just like that, I'd inserted myself into the center of a critical initiative. That first 30 days was a whirlwind. I said yes to everything. But strategically, I wasn't just taking on work, I was taking on visibility. The monthly divisional meeting came around. David was at the head of the table, giving his usual rambling update full of excuses for why we were behind on the Johnson account. When he finished, there was that uncomfortable silence. I spoke up. My voice was calm, level. I said, "If I may, David, I've been leading the task force on the Johnson account bottlenecks. Living document of my contributions and his failings. It was my insurance policy. And we've already identified a process flaw in their onboarding system. We've built a workaround. We're projecting to cut the delay by 70%, putting us back on schedule by the end of next week." I presented 3 slides I'd prepared on my own time, concise, data-driven, actionable. I didn't look at my team. I looked at the VPs at the end of the table. David was flustered. He stammered, "Well, yes, Sarah's team has been looking into that, but the damage was done." The contrast was stark. He was managing problems, I was solving them. I was creating a sense of momentum and inevitability. People started to see that. When I was in the room, things moved forward. By day 60, the siege was on. The landscape had changed. My colleagues, even those more senior than me, were coming to me for direction. They'd ask, "What's the play on this, Sarah?" before they'd even think to email David. I had become the de facto leader. But that wasn't enough. I needed to isolate the target. David's biggest weakness wasn't his incompetence, it was his pride. He hated being wrong, and he would never ever ask for help. This was the crack. The quarterly earnings forecast was coming up, and it was a nightmare. The numbers from the European division were a mess, a tangle of conflicting data from a recent acquisition. David was responsible for consolidating it all. I knew he was struggling. I also had a direct line into the European team, because I'd made a point of building a relationship with their lead analyst months ago, just in case. I scheduled a one-on-one with David's boss, the division VP, Amanda. I positioned it as a routine update on the client integration project. I delivered my update in 5 minute, crisp, positive results. Then I paused. I said, "Amanda, on another note, I was reviewing the data streams for the European forecast, just as a cross-check for our own numbers, and I noticed some significant inconsistencies in the legacy reporting format. I've already taken the liberty of building a reconciliation template that clears it up. I am happy to share it with David's team if it would be helpful." I wasn't pointing a finger, I was offering a solution. But in doing so, I was subtly exposing the problem. I was demonstrating that I was looking at the bigger picture, that I was proactive, while David was stuck in the weeds. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly. She was smart, she saw exactly what I was doing. And she appreciated it. She said send it to me directly make sure it gets to the right people. That was the moment I knew the siege was working. I had built a bridge over David's head. The stage was set for day 90, the big presentation to the executive committee on the year-end strategy. This was David's moment to shine, to present his grand vision for the next fiscal year. He'd been working on the deck for weeks, locked away in his office the day of the presentation. He was a bundle of nerves. We all filed into the boardroom. The CEO was there, the atmosphere was tense. David started his presentation. It was fine, it was safe, it was a rehash of last year's plan with updated numbers. Halfway through, the CEO stopped him. David, he said, this is all well and good, but it's reactive. Our competitors are eating our lunch in the emerging market segment. What's our aggressive play? David froze, he stammered, he started flipping through slides, muttering about market analysis and feasibility studies. The silence in the room was deafening. You could feel the opportunity slipping away. Amanda looked at me. She said, Sarah, you've been deep in the operational data. What are your thoughts? Is there a play there? This was at the coup. I didn't even look at my notes. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and connected my laptop. I had a 5-slide deck ready. I'd prepared it on my own, just in case, I called it. Simultaneously, I began building my coalition. This was the most delicate part. It couldn't look like I was campaigning, it had to happen organically. I made a point of scheduling brief, focused conversations with the senior VP, not to complain, never to complain. I'd go to her with solutions. I was reviewing the Q3 projections, and I noticed a potential bottleneck in the supply chain. I've sketched out a couple of ways we might mitigate that risk. I presented myself as someone invested in the Project Domino, a 3-phase market penetration strategy. For 10 minutes, I laid it out, the data, the targets, the timeline. It was bold. It was exactly what the CEO had asked for. I spoke with absolute conviction. When I finished, the CEO nodded slowly. He turned to David and said, that's the kind of forward thinking we need. David, I expect you and Sarah to make this your top priority. The hierarchy was already clear. He had said you and Sarah, but everyone in that room knew who had provided the thinking. David was a ghost at the table. The meeting ended 2 hours later. I was called into Amanda's office. David was already there, sitting down, his face pale. Amanda was direct. Sarah, she said, David has decided to pursue other opportunities, effective immediately. We're promoting you to Director of Operations. The team needs clear, decisive leadership, and you've proven you can provide it. The official announcement goes out Monday. I just nodded, shook her hand. I walked out past David, who wouldn't meet my eye. I went back to my desk. The offer was made, the war was over. It was a swift, surgical promotion. Management didn't do it for me. They did it to stabilize the team, to reward the obvious leader, to secure the future I had so clearly mapped out for them. So that's the aggressive plan. It works fast, but you need to understand the cost. This is a high-stakes, high-stress approach. You burn bridges, you create enemies. David is gone, but there are people who were loyal to him, who now look at me with suspicion. You have to be prepared to live with that. You have to be absolutely sure of your data, because any mistake under this kind of spotlight is fatal. It's not about being liked, it's about being undeniable. You use the insult as fuel, you turn the organization's urgency into your opportunity. You execute with precision, and you never ever look back, because hesitation is the one luxury you cannot afford. The first day I walked into that office, I could feel the weight of it all, that history. The air smelled like old coffee and toner, and the fluorescent lights hummed a low, steady note. My shoes squeaked on the linoleum floor, and every head turned. I was the new one, the young one, the one brought in to assist my boss, Mr. Henderson. He was a fixture. He had been running this department for 20 years. His office was in the corner, glass walls, and he had this big, heavy desk that looked like it had been there since the company started. He came out to greet me, a forced smile on his face. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be friendly, but felt more like he was sizing me up. Welcome aboard, he said, his voice a low rumble. Well, start you off slow, don't want to overwhelm you, just watch and learn for a while. He introduced me to the team as our new junior analyst, and I saw the looks, not hostile, just dismissive. I was a nonentity, a kid who wouldn't last. The comment that stuck with me, the one he made to the department head later that week, I overheard it by accident. I was grabbing files from the printer, and their voices carried from his office. Don't worry about him, Henderson said. He's bright but green, completely replaceable. Well, get him up to speed on the basics. And if it doesn't work out well, find another recent grad. The market's full of them. Replaceable, he said it so casually, like he was talking about a burnt-out light bulb. And in that moment, company success, not just my own career. Instead of feeling insulted, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Because he had just revealed his entire hand, he saw me as no threat at all. And that was the biggest advantage I could have ever asked for. I made a decision right. Then I would become a sponge. I would absorb everything. I wouldn't try to prove myself with big loud statements. I would be quiet. I would listen. I started arriving early before anyone else id. Make a pot of coffee. The way Henderson liked it, black, no sugar. Id go through the shared drive, not just the current projects, but the archives. I read decade-old reports, client briefs, financial summaries. I learned the rhythms of the place. I saw how Henderson operated. He was a creature of habit. He took his lunch at exactly 12:30, always at his desk, always reading the same industry paper. He had meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays that always ran 10 minutes over. He was comfortable. He was entrenched. And I started to see the cracks. The systems everyone used were archaic. There was a particular software for data analysis that was so old the interface looked like something from a history museum. The manual for it was a 3-ring binder, pages yellowed. And Fred Henderson loved it. It's reliable, he'd say. It's what I know. But I saw the inefficiency. A report that should take an hour took a full day. Because of all the manual data entry, I saw how the junior staff, the other people my age, would groan. When assigned to work on it, they were eager, smart, but they were being hamstrung by these old tools. So I started talking to them, not in a way that challenged Henderson, not at first, just casually in the break room over lunch. I'd ask questions. Have you ever used this newer platform? I read about it in a class slowly. I built a coalition, a quiet one. We were the people who saw a different way. We were tired of the phrase, "That's how it's always been done." We knew there was a better path, a faster one, a more intelligent one. We started sharing articles, links to webinars. It was a secret society of progress right under Henderson's nose, and because he saw me as harmless, he never noticed. The turning point came with the Apex Global project. It was a huge account, one of our biggest. They wanted a complete overhaul of their market analysis. They needed fresh ideas, innovative approaches. Henderson took the lead, of course. He presented his plan, a traditional deep dive report, using his beloved old software. He was confident he'd done this 100 times, but 2 weeks in it was clear it wasn't working. The data sets were too large, too complex for his system to handle. The team was struggling, working nights and weekends just to keep the outdated software from crashing. The initial presentation to the Apex team was a disaster. They were not impressed. They used words like dated and lackluster. You could see the panic in Henderson's eyes. He was facing a failure he didn't understand. That's when I spoke up. I asked for a chance. I went to the department head, not to undermine Henderson, but to offer a solution. I proposed using a cloud-based analytics platform. I'd been studying. I showed her a prototype I'd built with a few of the other junior staffers on our own time. It was dynamic. It was visual. It could process the data in minutes, not days. It was everything the client wanted. She was skeptical, but desperate. She gave me 48 hours. I did the same with the head of finance. I learned the language of his department. Instead of just saying a project was going well, I could articulate it in terms of ROI, efficiency gains, and cost avoidance. I built relationships with those senior directors offering help on cross-functional projects. I made sure my work was so good, so reliable, that my name became synonymous with success. People started to come to me directly for advice, bypassing my boss. I could feel the shift. The respect was building. We worked like we were possessed. My small, quiet coalition became a well-oiled machine. We knew what to do. We migrated the data. We built the interactive models. We prepared a presentation that wasn't just a report. It was an experience. The day of the meeting, Henderson sat in the back of the room, arms crossed. I could feel his gaze on me. But when I started talking, when I clicked through the live dashboards, when I showed the Apex team how they could manipulate the data themselves, in real time, the energy in the room shifted. Their faces changed. They leaned forward. They asked questions. They were engaged. They were excited. The result was a resounding success. Apex not only approved the project, they signed a longer, more lucrative contract. They said our approach was revolutionary. The department head was ecstatic. The following Monday, she called a full staff meeting. She praised the team effort, but then she singled me out. She talked about innovation. She talked about foresight. She talked about the need for the department to evolve to embrace the future. And then she made the announcement effective immediately. I was being promoted to lead. New specialized analytics unit. The department's strategic direction would now be mine to shape. Henderson would be taking on a senior advisory role, reporting to me. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at Henderson. The patronizing smile was gone. The confident posture had deflated. He just looked old, tired. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy responsibility. The underdog had won. But the victory was sobering. It wasn't about beating him. It was about proving that a fresh perspective, when combined with quiet observation and a willingness to learn, could be a powerful force for change. The replaceable newbie had become indispensable simply by seeing the world not as it was, but as it could be. That moment in the quarterly review when he leaned back in his leather chair and said, "Remember, everyone here is replaceable." He said it with a smile, a little corporate mantra he probably thought was motivating. And for a long time, I thought that was the problem, his ego, his need to feel superior. But sitting at my desk later, staring at the spreadsheet he'd just approved without even looking at it, it hit me. The problem wasn't that he was a bad manager. The problem was that the company had built a perfect environment for a bad manager to thrive. He wasn't some unique villain. He was a symptom, a predictable outcome of a broken system. I started mapping it out, the way information flowed, or more accurately didn't. Our projects were siloed. The marketing team never talked to the development team. Until a product was nearly finished, the metrics for success were vague, things like increased synergy or optimized workflow. They were meaningless. They allowed him to claim credit for anything that went right and blame the team for anything that went wrong. There were no clear processes. Every request went through him, creating a bottleneck. He controlled the flow of information, which meant he controlled the narrative to upper management. He wasn't a leader, he was a gatekeeper, and the gate was locked. Brick by silent brick. That's when my goal changed. It wasn't about exposing him as an individual that would just lead to him being replaced by someone else who would operate within the same flawed rules. My new goal was far more ambitious. I wanted to make his role as it existed obsolete. I wanted to build a system so efficient, so transparent, that it simply wouldn't need a manager like him anymore. I decided to fix the foundation, not just patch the cracks. It started quietly, almost invisibly. I didn't make any announcements. I didn't challenge him directly. That would have been suicide. Instead, I began rewiring the department from the ground up. I created a shared digital workspace, a single source of truth for all our projects. I set it up so that every task, every deadline, every piece of communication was visible to everyone on the team. I built automated reports that pulled data directly from our systems, showing real progress against quantifiable goals, no more subjective interpretations. Then I focused on the workflows. I identified the bottlenecks, the points where work consistently got stuck on his desk. I designed new collaborative processes that bypassed those points entirely. For instance, instead of waiting for him to approve a design brief, I created a peer review system where the relevant teams could give immediate feedback. The work moved faster, the quality improved, because the people actually doing the work were talking to each other. I encouraged a culture of open feedback and peer recognition. We started a simple Friday email where team members could shout out someone who helped them that week. It was small, but it began to shift the team's focus away from seeking validation from him and towards supporting each other. It was a silent revolution. He didn't even notice at first. He was probably relieved that fewer problems were landing on his desk. He could spend more time in meetings with other managers, talking in circles about corporate strategy. Meanwhile, our team was becoming a self-organizing unit. We were communicating directly, solving problems collaboratively, and our productivity was quietly skyrocketing. The new transparency meant that our successes were undeniable and attributable. The automated reports went directly to senior leadership, and for the first time, they could see exactly what our team was accomplishing and who was driving it. The turning point came during a major product launch. Traditionally, this was a chaotic mess. He would micromanage, change priorities at the last minute, and create confusion. This time we operated entirely within the new system. Id built. The project plan was in the shared workspace, updated in real time. The developers and the marketing team were in constant communication through the dedicated channels Id set up. When a problem arose with a feature, they solved it together in an afternoon, a process that used to take weeks of back and forth through him. The launch was our most successful ever. The numbers were staggering: a 50% reduction in time to market, a significant increase in customer satisfaction. The revenue projections were exceeded in the first week. Senior leadership took notice. The COO herself scheduled a meeting with our department to understand what had changed. Of course, our boss took center stage, ready to claim credit for the new strategy he had implemented. Then came the opportunity, the moment the entire plan was waiting for. The company launched a major new initiative, a flagship project that my boss championed. He was all over the company newsletter, taking the credit for the vision. But from the inside I could see it was built on a shaky foundation. The timelines were unrealistic, the budget was based on optimistic guesses, and the technology platform he'd insisted on was already showing cracks. I saw the disaster coming from a mile away. But the system I built was designed for truth. The COO had already seen the project logs, the communication trails, the clear data showing how the work was actually done. She asked him specific questions about the new collaborative workflows and the project management tools. He stumbled, he gave vague answers. It became painfully obvious that he wasn't just out of the loop. He was irrelevant to the new machinery of his own team. He was a conductor who didn't know the music, waving his baton in front of an orchestra that was already playing in perfect harmony without him. The resolution was swift and clinical. There was no dramatic confrontation, no yelling. It was a quiet corporate restructuring. He was transitioned out of his role. As the email said, the official reason was a strategic realignment. But we all knew the truth: the system had been cured of a disease, and the symptom had simply faded away. A week later, I was called into the COO's office. She didn't offer me his old job. She offered me something new, a promotion to a newly created position, Director of Operational Efficiency. My mandate was to do for the entire company what I had done for my department, to design and lead the new official structure based on the model I had created, to build systems that fostered transparency, collaboration, and genuine accountability. I sat in that clean, quiet office, and I finally understood the real meaning of that phrase: everyone is replaceable. He was right, but not in the way he thought he was replaceable, because his function was based on control and obscurity. When I brought in light and efficiency, that function vanished. The moral is this: sometimes the most powerful way to replace someone isn't to fight them directly, it's to change the world they live in. You make the ground beneath their feet so solid and clear that there's simply no place left for them to stand. You don't defeat the player, you redesign the game so thoroughly that they can no longer play. I did two things. First, I documented my concerns. I sent carefully worded emails to my boss outlining the risks, suggesting contingency plans. He dismissed them, of course. He called me cautious, resistant to change. I saved those emails. Second, I prepared my own plan. I worked nights and weekends on my own time to develop a full alternative approach. It was more conservative, but it was airtight, with realistic milestones, a clear budget, and a more stable tech stack. I had the data to back up every. He said, look, you're a solid performer, but let's be realistic. In today's market, your skill set is replaceable. Single point. The project, as predicted, began to implode. Deadlines were missed, costs skyrocketed. The VP was furious, my boss was scrambling, making excuses, pointing fingers at his team. The atmosphere was tense. This was the critical moment. The king was in check. I requested a meeting with the senior VP, just the two of us. I walked in calm, prepared. I didn't go in guns blazing. I framed it as deep concern for the project's success. And for the company, I presented my alternative plan, not as an "I told you so," but as a viable path to rescue the initiative. I showed her my documentation, not the emails criticizing my boss, but the data proving the original plan was flawed. I showed her my track record of successful projects. I spoke about the team's morale, about the need for strong, stable leadership to see this through. I was respectful, but firm. I positioned myself not as a usurper, but as the only logical solution to a problem that was hurting the company. I was the one who could fix it. The meeting was quiet. She asked sharp, intelligent questions. I had answers for every single one. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't just seeing a disgruntled employee. She was seeing a leader. She thanked me for my candor and my professionalism. The following weeks were a strange limbo. My boss became increasingly desperate and hostile. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what. He tried to pull me into his failing project, to make me share the blame. But I had built my walls too high, my work was impeccable, my communications were clear. And CCD to the right people, he had no leverage. Then the reorganization was announced, a company-wide email from the senior VP. It talked about streamlining leadership and aligning skills with strategic goals. My boss role was being eliminated. He was offered a lateral move to a less critical department, a clear demotion. He was gone within a week. The day after his departure, the VP called me into her office, the same office where months before I'd laid out my case. She offered me the job, the title, the salary, the authority. She said the company needed a steady hand, someone with a proven track record, and the respect of their peers. She said I was the obvious choice. I didn't gloat, I accepted with a quiet gratitude. I walked back to my desk. But it wasn't my desk anymore. It was going to be the corner office. The first thing I did was to celebrate. I sat down. And I finally allowed myself to feel everything. I had suppressed the insult that started it. All was now just a footnote. The anger had burned away, leaving something colder and more durable: resolve. The new nameplate arrived. I watched them install it on the door. It wasn't about the title. It was about the quiet understanding that settled over me. Being irreplaceable isn't about being the only one who can do a job. It's about making yourself so integral, so valuable, that replacing you becomes a net loss for the organization. It's about building your case not with words, but with actions, not in a day, but over countless days of silent, determined work. Replaceable. My former boss called me replaceable because he saw the role, not the person filling it. He failed to see the strategy, the patience, the quiet intelligence. He mistook my professionalism for passivity. In the end, his casual cruelty was the catalyst for his own obsolescence. I used the negativity as fuel, but I built the engine myself. And the final satisfying truth was this: he was right about one thing. Someone was replaceable, he just had the wrong person in mind. The idea of being replaceable, it's a strange one, isn't it? It hangs in the air long after the words are spoken. It's not just an insult, it's a psychological tool, a very specific, very calculated one. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, not just about what it did to me in that moment, but why it was said in the first place. You have to understand the mechanics of it to really disarm it. See, when someone in a position of power tells you that you're irreplaceable, they aren't just stating a fact about the job market, they are engaging in a power play. The entire purpose is to instill a specific kind of fear. It's the fear of scarcity, the fear of being cast out. It's designed to make you compliant, to make you work harder for less recognition. Because you're supposed to feel lucky just to have a seat at the table, it's meant to shut down dissent. Why would you challenge a decision or propose a new idea if you're constantly reminded of your own disposability? It keeps you in your place. It's a management technique, sure, but a deeply corrosive one. But here's the thing I realized much later: that comment, that weapon, it often says more about the person wielding it than the target. You start to notice the patterns. A boss who constantly needs to remind everyone of their replaceability is often a boss who is deeply insecure about their own position. They're projecting their own fear of being replaced, of being found out, of not being good enough, gets externalized and put onto you. It's a way of managing their own anxiety by making you fearful. They create buffer around their own insecurity. If you're busy worrying about your job, you're not looking too closely at whether they're actually competent to hold theirs. It's a deflection. And the impact, it's profound. It's like a key that fits a lock you didn't even know you had. For me, it tapped directly into my imposter syndrome. That little voice that whispers, see, they finally figured it out. You don't really belong here. It erodes your self-worth from the inside out. You start to question your contributions. You downplay your successes. You become hesitant, second-guessing every decision. Because you're operating from a place of fear instead of confidence. The goal of the insult is achieved. You become smaller, quieter, more manageable. And that, I decided, was the most dangerous outcome of all. The shift didn't happen overnight. The initial hurt was real. It felt like a verdict, like a final judgment on my entire professional worth. I replayed the moment over and over: the tone of his voice, the dismissive wave of his hand, the way he said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. I felt sick, I felt angry, but most of all, I felt like a victim. And that was the first thing I had to change. I had to stop seeing myself as the target of his comment and start seeing myself as the architect of my response. The word didn't just hang in the air, it landed like a physical weight on my chest. For a second, All the sound just drained out of the room. I could see his lips moving, wrapping up the meeting. But all I heard was a high-pitched hum. Shock first, then a hot, sharp wave of humiliation washed over me from my face down to my fingertips. I felt my cheeks burn. All the late nights, the projects I'd saved, the extra miles I'd run for this team. And it all boiled down to that one word: replaceable. The crucial first step was to process that hurt without letting it define me. I gave myself a deadline. I allowed myself 48 hours to feel sorry for myself, to be angry, to dissect every detail. And then that was it. I made a conscious decision. I reframed the entire narrative. I stopped seeing irreplaceable as a statement of fact, and started seeing it as a challenge. It was a gauntlet thrown down. He was essentially saying, prove me wrong. And I decided that was exactly what I was going to do. But not for him, for me. This is where the growth mindset comes in. Instead of focusing on the insult, I focused on my own trajectory. What skills did I want to acquire that were beyond the immediate scope of my job? Where could I create more value, not just for the company, but for my own resume? I stopped thinking about job security as something the company would grant me, and started building it from within. Security became synonymous with my own competence, my network, my unique set of skills. I asked myself a simple question: if I were replaced tomorrow, what would I want my legacy here to be? What project would I be proud of? What problem would I have solved? I started working towards that legacy every single day. This is where theory meets practice. It's one thing to have a new mindset, it's another to operate effectively within the existing ecosystem. Office politics is a reality, but you can navigate it with emotional intelligence, not with cynicism. The first part of that is cultivating a quiet confidence. I stopped trying to boast about my work in meetings. Instead, I focused on delivering work that spoke for itself. I became the person who, when a crisis hit, would calmly say, I've already started looking into a solution. Action over announcement. Let your results be your loudest advocate. Then strategic relationship building. This isn't about brown-nosing, it's about genuine connection. I made an effort to understand what other departments did. I'd have coffee with people from marketing, from finance, from IT. I asked them about their challenges. I listened. I looked for ways my work could make their jobs easier. I built a web of respect based on mutual benefit, not on empty flattery. I identified the key influencers, not just the people with fancy titles, but the ones everyone genuinely respected for their knowledge and integrity. I aligned myself with them by contributing meaningfully to their projects. Managing up became a game of subtle communication. Instead of sending my boss a long email about everything I'd done, I'd frame updates. In terms of outcomes, the system update is complete, which should reduce the support team's ticket volume by about 30%. According to the data, I made sure my achievements were visible. But I tied them directly to broader company goals. I never mentioned the replaceable comment again. I didn't need to. My actions were starting to write a different story. The triumph, when it came, wasn't a loud, dramatic event. It was quiet, almost procedural. The promotion was announced in a company-wide email. My new title was there in black and white. But the real moment happened about an hour later. I was in my new office, his old office actually, and he came to the door. He was clearing out his desk. The company had restructured, and his position was made redundant. The irony was so thick you could taste it. The anger came next, a deep, simmering rage. I wanted to stand up, to yell, to list every single contribution. But I didn't. Something clicked inside me. A switch flipped. I saw the smug, relaxed look on his face, the utter lack of awareness. And I knew right then that any emotional outburst would just prove his point. It would be the reaction of someone who was in fact replaceable. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I swallowed the anger. I forced a tight, professional smile. I nodded. I thanked him for. He stood there for a second, and I saw it in his eyes, the same fear he'd once tried to instill in me. He mumbled something about congratulations. And I had a choice to make in that moment. I could have been cold. I could have been smug. I could have said something that mirrored his own cruelty back at him. But that would have meant his philosophy had one. That would have meant I had become a version of him. So I chose grace. I stood up. I offered my hand. And I said, thank you. I genuinely appreciate that. I know this is a tough day. If there's anything I can do to help with the transition, please let me know. It wasn't fake. It was strategic in its humanity. I was demonstrating a different kind of power. The power of security, the power that doesn't need to diminish others to feel tall. Leading after that meant consciously rejecting the model I had been under. I would never ever tell a member of my team that they were replaceable. Instead, I focus on their growth. I talk about their unique contributions. I create an environment where difficult conversations can happen without the threat of personal annihilation. My goal is to build a team where people feel valued, because I know from experience that a person who feels valued will outperform a person who is operating from fear every single time. The lasting lesson, the one I carry with me now, is that true job security is an inside job. It has nothing to do with your title or your salary. It's the unshakable belief in your own ability to figure things out, to add value, to adapt and learn. It's the network you build that respects you for your character and your competence. It's the portfolio of work you've done that you're genuinely proud of. They can replace you in a role, but they can't replace the skills you've mastered, the relationships you've built, or the self-respect you've earned. That's yours to keep. No one can ever make you feel replaceable when you know deep down that your foundation is built on rock, not sand. The power dynamics didn't just shift that day I got the promotion, they dissolved, because I was no longer playing a game where someone else could declare me a loser. I had built my own table. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the fluorescent lights hum just a little louder than usual. He called me into his office, didn't even look up from his screen, said it so casually like he was commenting on the weather. "You know, Sarah, you're a solid performer, reliable, but you're just not irreplaceable." He finally glanced at me. "We need people who are strategic, who bring something unique to the table." The words didn't land like an insult, not at first. They landed like a diagnosis, a cold hard truth I'd been avoiding. I walked back to my desk, the phrase echoing in my head, not irreplaceable. It felt like a final verdict on my career. That night I didn't get angry. I got a notebook. I sat at my kitchen table, and I conducted the most brutal audit of my professional life. I made 2 lists. On one side, everything I knew how to do, my day-to-day tasks, the systems I managed. It was a decent list, but it was a list of maintenance. It was about keeping the engine running. On the other side, I wrote down the skills of the people 2 levels above me, the people in the strategy meetings. I never got invited to financial modeling, advanced data analysis, public speaking with real authority, cross-functional project leadership. The gap between the 2 lists was a chasm. It was embarrassing. He wasn't wrong. His feedback. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out of that room. The next week was all research. I wasn't just looking for a promotion anymore. I was looking for leverage. I read job descriptions for roles I wanted, not just the one above mine. I looked at industry reports on the most in-demand skills for the next 5 years. I reached out to a few trusted contacts at other companies and asked them point-blank what made someone truly invaluable on their teams. The answer was always a combination. It wasn't just one technical skill, it was the ability use that skill to solve a business problem, and the communication skills to make everyone else see the solution. That became my blueprint. I had a 1-year plan broken down into quarters. Quarter 1 was for hard skills, quarter 2 for soft skills. The rest of the year was for integration, for making it all impossible to ignore. My learning sprint started on a Monday. I signed up for an online certification in advanced data analysis. I'd always been okay with spreadsheets, but this was different. This was about predictive modeling, about finding patterns nobody else could see. I spent my evenings and weekends buried in tutorials. I learned a new programming language, specifically for data manipulation. It was tedious. There were nights I wanted to quit, but I kept seeing his face, that dismissive glance. That was my fuel. At the same time, I started working on the soft skills. I joined a public speaking club that met at 7 in the morning, before work. The first time I had to give an impromptu speech, my hands shook so badly I had to clutch the podium. But I kept going. I read books on negotiation, not just for salary, but for resources, for buy-in on projects. I started paying close attention in meetings to who really got their ideas heard, and it was never the loudest person. It was the person who spoke with data, with clarity, and with a solution already mapped out. The most important rule I set for myself was immediate application. I wasn't going to wait until I had a certificate to start using this. I found a small lingering problem in our sales data reporting. It was a manual process that took someone hours each week. Using my new skills, I built a simple script that automated the entire thing. I didn't ask for permission, I just did it. Then I went to the head of sales and showed her. I said I noticed this was a tedious task, so I built this. It should save your team about 5 hours a week. She was stunned. That little script was my first tangible piece of proof. It was no longer about what I was learning, it was about what I could now do. This became my new mode of operation. I stopped waiting to be assigned projects. I started identifying problems my boss had ignored for years. There was a chronic communication breakdown between the marketing and product development teams. Projects were always delayed. Because requirements were unclear, I didn't complain about it. I designed a simple new project intake process, with clear templates and accountability checkpoints. I scheduled a meeting with the leads of both departments and facilitated the conversation. I wasn't their boss, I had no authority, but I had a well-researched solution, and the facilitation skills to guide them to an agreement. They adopted my process. The project delays on the next launch decreased by 30%. I made sure people saw this. I started writing short, concise articles for our internal company blog, not boastful pieces, but thought leadership. One was titled 3 Data-Driven Ways to Improve Cross-Functional Collaboration. I volunteered to lead a workshop on the new data analysis techniques I was using. At first, only a few people came, but word got around. Junior employees started asking me for advice. I became a mentor, almost by accident. My network within the company exploded. But the moment the door closed behind me, the plan started to form. The emotion was still there, a burning coal in my gut. But I was no longer going to let it consume me. I was going to use it as fuel. This wasn't about getting even, it was about proving a point to him and to myself. The goal was no longer just to keep my job, the goal was to have his. Because I was now a source of value, not just a task completer. Everything I did, I attached a number to it. That automated script saved 5 hours a week, which translated into a specific dollar amount of saved labor. The new project process reduced delays by 30%, which meant products got to market faster. I kept a file of these metrics. My contributions were no longer vague statements like worked hard, they were concrete. They were undeniable. I was building a business case for my own promotion, without ever having to say a word about it. The shift in the office was subtle at first, then dramatic. My boss would come to me with questions about the data behind a decision. He'd ask for my input on strategic plans. I watched as the problems he used to handle started coming to me instead, because I had already demonstrated I could solve them more efficiently. His role was becoming less critical, not because he was incompetent, but because I had made myself the go-to expert on the things that mattered most. I had absorbed his relevance. About 10 months after that initial conversation, I was invited to a meeting with a senior vice president 2 levels above my boss. My boss wasn't there. The SVP got straight to the point. Sarah, the work you've been doing hasn't gone unnoticed. The project intake process, the data work on the sales team, the workshops you're solving problems we've had for years. We're creating a new role, head of operational efficiency, and we're not even going to post it externally. We want you to take it. There was no gloating in that moment, just a quiet, deep satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you built something real. The key takeaway, the one thing I want you to understand, is that in today's world, your job title doesn't protect you, your tenure doesn't protect you. The only thing that makes you truly irreplaceable is your portfolio of skills. It's the one currency that never depreciates if you keep investing in it. It's not about working longer hours, it's about working smarter, about strategically acquiring the leverage that makes you the obvious solution. It's the ultimate protection, because you can't be replaced if you are the only one who knows how to build what comes next. The initial feeling was pure hot anger. It was a flash like a lightning strike right behind my eyes. He had just taken credit for the 3rd time that month for a project my team had bled over. And he did it with this smug little smile in the meeting right in front of the VP. My first instinct, the raw human reaction, was to stand up to call him out right then and there, to list every single instance, every lie, every time he'd thrown one of us under the bus to save his own skin. The words were right there on the tip of my tongue, acidic and ready. But I didn't. I remember the feeling of my jaw tightening, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. I just looked down at my notebook. I took a breath, a real deep one. And I made a choice, a conscious, difficult choice. I wasn't going to fight him on his terms. I wasn't going to sink to that level. Gossip in the break room, subtle sabotage, anonymously leaking his mistakes. That would have been easy, but it would have made me just like him. It would have poisoned me, and it would have poisoned the team even more. The first phase was assessment. I needed to see the battlefield clearly. I started with him. What were his actual weaknesses? He was a smooth talker, great in front of clients, But his strategic planning was weak. He relied on momentum on the work his team did to make him look good. He took credit easily, but delegated blame even easier. He was allergic to granular detail. And his relationship with his own boss, the senior VP, was strained. I'd seen the VP look frustrated in meetings when my decided right there in that silent, furious moment that I was going to take the high road even if it was longer, even if it was harder. I was going to win this. But I was going to win it clean. I committed not to his downfall, but to my own excellence. I would outperform him so thoroughly, so consistently, that the contrast would become undeniable. I would treat him with the same professional courtesy I always had because my integrity wasn't something I could turn on and off depending on who I was talking to. It was a line I wouldn't cross. The goal was to see him fail. The goal was to prove beyond any doubt what real leadership looked like. So that's what I did. I started with my own team. I made our corner of the office a sanctuary from the dysfunction when he would micromanage, demanding constant updates and questioning every decision. I would push back gently, but firmly. I'd say, I trust Sarah's judgment on this. She's the expert, or we've got this covered. I'll send you a summary when we hit the next milestone. I stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own bad decisions. If he gave us an unrealistic deadline, I wouldn't quietly work nights and weekends to make it happen. I'd send a calmly worded email outlining the risks and the resources we'd need to meet it, ceasing the necessary people. It wasn't aggressive, it was transparent. I became the person people went to when they were stuck, not because I had all the answers, but because I knew how to find them. I'd connect people from different departments, facilitate conversations, and give credit freely. I remember one Tuesday, Mark from engineering came to me looking exhausted. He said the boss had been changing the specs on a project daily, and the team was ready to revolt. I didn't trash talk the boss, I just sat down with Mark, and we mapped out the core requirements. Then I went with him to the stakeholder meeting and helped facilitate a conversation that locked in a final agreed-upon set of specs. I didn't say, see, the boss is the problem, I just showed them a better way to work. And people noticed. The atmosphere started to shift, our team's morale improved, our projects started running smoother. It was a strategy of contrast. I didn't have to say a negative word about him. My actions, my team's success, our collaborative spirit, it all just highlighted what was missing from his leadership. It made his opacity and his insecurity more apparent, not because I was pointing it out, but because I was demonstrating the alternative right beside him. This quiet campaign was all about letting the work speak for itself. I became meticulous, not in a paranoid way, but in a professional one. I kept a simple log, not a list of grievances, but a record of facts, project completions under budget and ahead of schedule, positive feedback from clients, notes from meetings where I had proposed a solution that was later adopted. It was all objective, data-driven. I wasn't collecting ammunition. I was building a case for my own capability. I also started to focus on building advocates, not just allies. I didn't want a clique of people who disliked the boss. I wanted the respect of people who mattered, based on what I could deliver. When I had a one-on-one with a senior director, I didn't complain, I talked about opportunities. I'd say, I've been thinking about how we could streamline the reporting process between our teams. It might save us about 10 hours a month. I made it about the business, not about personalities. I volunteered for cross-functional committees that gave me visibility to other leaders in the company. I made sure my contributions, there were substantive. Slowly, organically, people started to see me differently. I wasn't just a competent manager. I was a leader. The shift was so gradual. The VP of sales mentioned to me casually, after a presentation, you really have a handle on your team's dynamics. It's impressive. That was at no grand moment, just a quiet acknowledgement that the contrast was being noticed. The poor boss couldn't answer a specific question about our project timelines or budgets. Leadership was becoming apparent all on its own, simply because there was a viable, effective alternative operating in plain sight. The call from HR was unexpected. They asked me to come to a meeting with the head of our division. I thought it was about a new initiative. I walked in, and the atmosphere was serious, but not hostile. They got right to it. They said that after a lot of discussion, and looking at the performance metrics and team feedback, they were making a change. My boss was being moved to a different individual contributor role, and they were offering me his position. They said it was a natural progression, a reward for the stability and growth I'd brought to the team. They talked about my integrity, my collaborative approach. They said the company needed more leaders like me. It was the most validating moment of my professional life. Because it was earned, it was clean. Then came the hard part, the transition. I asked for a meeting with him, my former boss. I requested a neutral conference room. I was nervous. I didn't know if he'd be angry, bitter, sarcastic. He walked in. And he looked defeated, smaller somehow. I didn't gloat. I didn't offer fake sympathy. I was just professional. I said I want to make this transition as smooth as possible for the team. They're our main priority. I focused entirely on the future, on the work. I asked for his insights, what he thought were the key challenges coming up. I treated him with respect, not as my boss, but as a colleague who had history with the projects. And you know what? By the end of the meeting, some of the tension had eased. He wasn't my friend. But the bridge wasn't burned. It was fragile, but it was still standing. He knew. And I knew what had happened. But we didn't have to talk about it. The facts had spoken for themselves. The lesson, the real victory, wasn't the title or the office. It was the peace of mind. I never had to look over my shoulder wondering if I'd left a trail of bitterness behind me. I never had to worry that my promotion was built on sand, on secrets and betrayals. My team respected me because they saw how I got there. The senior leadership trusted me because I had proven my worth without tearing anyone else down. I proved that you can win ethically, that you can advance through a difficult situation, not adding more toxicity, but by being an antidote to it. Lasting success, the kind that feels solid and meaningful, isn't built on fear or manipulation. It's built on respect, respect for your work, respect for your colleagues, and most importantly, respect for yourself. And that's a foundation that never crumbles. The thing that broke me wasn't the workload, it was the casualness of it. We were in his office, the glass walls making everything feel like a fishbowl. I'd just finished presenting the quarterly projections numbers I'd worked on for 3 straight weekends. He leaned back in that expensive chair of his, the one that squeaked, and he said, "Good work. But let's be real, anyone could have crunched these numbers." Then he smiled, this thin, dismissive smile. "You're a good, but you're a replaceable. Never forget that." Replaceable, the word just hung in the air-conditioned air. It wasn't said with malice. That was the worst part. It was a statement of fact, like commenting on the weather. And in that moment, something just clicked off inside me. The loyalty, the late nights, the feeling that this was my second family. It all evaporated. The emotional connection, severed, clean and final. And what replaced it was cold, clear, and brutally logical. If I was just an asset, a replaceable part, then fine, I would start acting like one. But not the way he meant. I wouldn't be a cog, I would be the entire machine. I decided right then that I was no longer an employee, I was a business, and this company was my primary client.